Didn't begin to suspect anything because of the death itself. It was the silence that caught me. In practice, she arrived like so many others before her. A female body around 30 years old, pale skin, dressed in sleepwear. Preliminary report pointing to cardiac arrest during sleep. No external signs of violence. No psychiatric history. Nothing that strayed from what we've witnessed 1,000 times before. But sometimes what disturbs you isn't what appears. It's what doesn't appear. And in her case, what struck me first was the rigidity of her mouth. I usually begin the examination at the extremities, then move to the face, thoracic region, following standard protocol. But when I went to open her lips, they wouldn't yield easily. At first I thought it might be cadaveric rigidity or post-mortem desiccation, but it wasn't that. The texture felt elastic. The lips appeared normal from the outside. No fissures, no trace of dried blood, nothing. Who's too firm, as if someone had reinforced something from within. I reached for the most delicate forceps I have. When I gently pulled back the upper lip, I felt a resistance that made no sense. The internal tissues weren't loose. They were attached at a point that shouldn't exist. I was alone in that moment. The team hadn't returned from lunch yet. I didn't think I'd find anything extraordinary. Perhaps some kind of fibrosis or post-trauma adhesion. But even before seeing it, I felt a chill run through me, as if the body itself was defending a secret. I positioned the retractor and angled the internal light, and that's when I saw it. There was suturing, thread thing, almost artisanal, nearly invisible to the naked eye, worked on with such meticulous care that, if not for the tissue rigidity, it would have gone completely unnoticed. The stitches connected the interior of the upper lip to the gum line in a pattern that resembled delicate embroidery, and they had been there for some time, long enough for the tissue to heal around them. No inflammation, no pus, no odor. Nothing indicated this was recent, yet it was undeniably real. I closed her mouth slowly. I looked at the file again. No surgeries registered, no teeth extracted, no internal lesions, ... There was no medical or dental reason for this. Gradually, I explored deeper. I used the lateral retractor, examined the cheeks, the palate. The same thing on the lower side. Discrete stitches, symmetrical, with minuscule knots and resistant thread. The skin hadn't been pierced from the outside. All of it was done internally, with the technique of someone who knew how to hide what they were doing. I went back to the police examination team. The officer who handled the case described the house as showing no signs of forced entry. Everything in order. The boyfriend, or partner, whatever he was, had been at the scene. He said he found her already lifeless, with a peaceful expression. He called emergency services, tried to revive her. Nobody suspected anything. Not the paramedics, not the police department. Apparently just a young woman who went to sleep and never woke up. But this ... this wasn't natural. It was as if someone wanted to silence her. Not in the metaphorical sense, but literally, as if it were critically important that her mouth never open again. You know what's worse. Not a single stitch had been forced. Not one thread broken. No signs of struggle. It was as if she had accepted it. I stood there for several minutes. Didn't write anything down yet. I just stayed there, staring at that face that seemed at peace, but with lips bound like a secret no one was meant to hear. When the team returned, I only mentioned I asked them to leave the oral cavity to me. Said it was an odontological protocol, a technical lie. But I needed time, needed space. In my mind, the questions began to accumulate. Who did this? Why? How long ago? And the cruelest question of all, ... How did no one see? I returned to the clinical report, reviewed all the previous examinations she'd had in her life. A checkup from 2 years before, with no relevant observations. No dentist reported anything. No doctor noticed. I had never seen this knot. Like tease. And it don't even now. I still believe I wasn't supposed to have seen it. Have you ever felt that? Some truths are buried so deep within people that they transform into physical scars, into silent testimonies carved into flesh itself. Later that afternoon, when the room had mostly emptied, I continued alone. The white light from the main lamp mixed with the orange glow of sunset filtering through the gaps up high. The heat pressed down, exhaustion too, but I couldn't stop looking at her. It wasn't about what I had seen anymore, It was about what it provoked within me. Because the truth is, after you see stitching like that inside someone's mouth, you begin to question everything. I reviewed every part of her body. Her arms were clean, no marks of restraint. Her nails had no dirt underneath, nothing indicating scratches or struggle. No damage to the tongue, no broken teeth, no hidden lesions. Just that absurd stitching, concealed where nobody looks. And then came the thought I had never allowed to enter. What if she did it herself? The type of thread wasn't surgical. It was sewing thread, fine, firm, dark brown. The symmetry suggested the person used a mirror, or practiced, or already knew how. With each passing minute, that idea took shape and filled me with a kind of fear I'd never experienced before. Because it was no longer about someone having done this to her. It was about someone having taught her to do this to herself. Perhaps since childhood, perhaps as routine. As Puni's men, as a ritual to teach her how to remain silent. It wasn't just the body, it was the intention behind it. I made sure to document the suturing with precision in my report. I took photographs, measured the stitches, recorded the pattern, but I stopped short of including any theory, because none belonged there. Only what I saw belonged there. The cause of death remained cardiorespiratory arrest. There were no internal injuries, no suspicious substances in the blood, no technical indication of aggression. Nothing that would justify a new inquiry, nothing that would provide grounds for investigation, and yet she had her mouth sewn shut from the inside. The following week, I received an informal contact from a nurse at the emergency center. She said she recognized the young woman's name, as she'd come through several of her shifts, but she seemed quiet, the nurse's own words. The young woman worked in customer service at a small jewelry store. She had no children. She'd been living with her boyfriend for about 3 years. Neighbors said they were a reserved couple. No one ever heard them fight. The man was called in to supplement the medical record. He said she suffered from anxiety attacks, that sometimes she'd go days without wanting to talk to anyone. But he never knew of any, never saw stitches, never suspected anything. He swore he only found her collapsed on the bedroom floor and called in desperation. Maybe it was the truth. Maybe it wasn't. The only certainty is that this woman had a story kept hidden where no one looks. I spent days unable to work properly after that. Every time a woman came into the morgue, I found myself tilting her chin more carefully, pulling back the lower lip with extra caution, examining every fold of the gum line, as if I might discover another hidden stitching. And that feeling, it never left me. Years have passed since that case, but I still find myself reviewing her photographs from time to time. I open the folder in the system, read the report again, as if I might find some detail I let slip through, as if I might discover what she was trying to say. But there's no message, no explanation, only silence. Too much silence. And now I understand. What disturbs me isn't what she had in her mouth. It's what she perhaps had to swallow for so long. What she kept buried deep inside where no one could reach. I only noticed because of the light. It was such a small detail, so out of place, that if the ceiling fan hadn't cast a shadow flickering quickly across her eyelid, I would have ignored it, just like everyone else. But I saw a shadow too dark in the corner of her closed eye, a darkness that didn't belong. The girl arrived around 10 at night, on a simple stretcher covered with a sheet up to her chin, an adolescent probably between 14 and 16 years old. No documents, no apparent signs of violence. Body found collapsed on a sidewalk in the Santo Amaro neighborhood, according to the report. Cardiorespiratory arrest, preliminary cause. Her skin was still warm, which meant it had been no more than an hour since she'd stopped breathing. The temperature outside was suffocating. Inside, the examination room didn't help either. Fan spinning on the ceiling, light far too white and harsh. A dragging weekend shift. No auxiliary staff on duty. I was alone with the body, alone with whatever secret she carried. Her face had no scratches, no bruising, no swelling. It was as if she had simply fallen asleep with her eyes closed and never returned. That particular stillness that only death provides, but which still deceives the eyes for a while, making you believe in peace where there might have been none. I can't say what bothered me first. Perhaps the fact that she seemed calm, or the fact that her eyebrow was perfect. I'm sorry, I know how that sounds, but it really was. The girl had symmetrical eyebrows, aligned as if she'd had them done that very day. It wasn't something that would catch attention in a normal examination, but there, in a room where everything smells of formaldehyde and latex, any beauty too intact unsettles you. That's when I saw the shadow. I was preparing to begin the external examination when the ceiling light swayed slightly with the fan and projected a dark line across the middle of her upper eyelid. At first I thought it was dirt, an internal bruise, something like that. I leaned closer, grabbed a magnifying glass. When I pulled back the eyelid with fine forceps, I felt my throat go dry. It wasn't a bruise at all. Someone had drawn an open eye on the inside of the upper eyelid. A simple drawing, executed with precision. Iris, pupil, short lashes, like a child might draw, but with firmness, with a single stroke. As if whoever had done this knew the contour of the skin there intimately well. I closed my eyes for a second, tried to process what I was seeing. Then I opened the other eyelid. Same thing, another eye, the same size, aligned on the internal part, as if she were looking at someone even with her eyes closed, but not really closed. The ink wasn't smeared. It was dry, but recent, without crackling, without running. I stared for several long seconds, unable to look away. The stroke was so exact that it gave the impression of being in the right place, as if the painted eyes followed the same line as the real eyes underneath. It took me a while to register what this meant, what this truly signified. Either someone did this while she was alive, or did it immediately after. In both cases, the idea made me sick, because there were no marks of resistance, no tremor in the stroke, no smudging, nothing indicating that the person moved or was restrained. It was done with calm, with intention, with a purpose I couldn't begin to fathom. What would it mean if the last thing someone wanted to leave in this world was the illusion that they were still watching, still present, still refusing to completely disappear? The autopsy yielded nothing conclusive, no internal trauma, no visible substances in the first examination. Cause undetermined. They said they could investigate deeper toxicology, but with the girl unidentified, no relatives, no one coming to claim her, the process was different. The system moves differently for those who have no one. Share in the comments a reflection beginning with, I recognize that ... Double quotes about something hidden you've finally allowed yourself to see. Sometimes speaking our truth, even anonymously, breaks the silence that has held us captive for far too long. Your words might be the permission someone else needs to acknowledge their own buried reality. I completed the report, attached photographs, registered the detail of the painted eyes and the observations. Nobody commented on anything. None of the teams that attended to her before me. Paramedics removal service, triage, ... Notice this. Perhaps that was the worst part. Nobody saw, or they saw, and said nothing. She was lying there with her eyes closed, but in a way that deceived, as if it were intentional, as if she wanted to keep watching even in death. I thought about mentioning it to someone at the time, but I stayed quiet. Maybe because I knew that if I opened my mouth, I'd hear it dismissed as just some kind of sick joke or some teenage ritual. And I didn't want to hear that. I couldn't bear to hear her reduced to that. That night I took the photographs. I did it with zoom, with scalar ruler, with natural light and artificial light. I did it the right way. I wanted to ensure that nobody would say later that it was my invention, that I had exaggerated, that I had confused some stain with something meaningful. But the truth is that looking at the photos afterward, the impact was lesser. The images lost something that only those who saw it up close understand. It was as if the drawn eyes weren't just strokes. They were presence, a way of still being there, of refusing to be erased. I took much longer with the examination than I should have. I went home at the end of my shift with the sensation that she was still watching me, even with her eyelids closed. Heaven and death. I spent 2 days waiting for some news. A name, a relative, some missing person reports. Nothing. Not in newspapers, not on social media, not in any bulletin. Nothing at all. The following week, when I returned from my shift, I went looking for the file. It was already archived, burial authorized as unidentified. The common destination in these cases, a simple cemetery, where nameless bodies are placed side by side. covered only by the report number, forgotten by everyone except perhaps God. I thought about going there. I swear I did, but I didn't go. What would I do there? I'm a medical examiner. The body arrives. I document, examine, fill out the paperwork, forward it along, and it's finished. We're trained for this. To look and not feel. To see everything and take nothing home with us. But with her, something remained. Something lodged itself inside me and wouldn't let go. I began noticing all the eyes. Every time a body came in with intact eyelids, I looked twice, then 3 times. Then I started opening them more carefully, like someone searching for the same stroke, the same hidden gaze, the same message from beyond. I never found it. I never saw anything like it again. But sometimes, and this is what disturbs me most, I thought I did. I thought I saw a shadow, a curvature that resembled her stroke, her technique. And when I looked closer, it wasn't there. Just my mind betraying me, playing tricks in the fluorescent light. We have a technical name for this: persistence of image. When the brain retains a visual stimulus too powerful and begins reproducing it without control, like seeing shadows after watching something disturbing. But it wasn't just visual. It was something deeper, something that lived in the space between what I saw and what I couldn't unsee. There was this one time, about 3 months later, when a triage nurse mentioned she found it strange the way a girl was sleeping. I didn't say anything. I was the one who received the body afterward. It wasn't the same girl, of course, but the phrase lodged itself in my throat like a stone. Strange the way she was sleeping. We shouldn't talk like that. Death isn't sleep, but sometimes it resembles it so closely we convince ourselves otherwise, and that's what disturbs me most. The idea that we deceive ourselves even in this. That even in death someone can be pretending. That the stillness we see might be performance rather than peace. Since that sweltering night, I've never trusted closed eyelids again. And I've also never been able to look at a sleeping teenager without thinking about it. About who drew those eyes. About why. About how long it took. Whether she was conscious. Whether she saw what was being done to her. Whether she understood the message being written on her skin. What bothers me deep down isn't what I saw. It's what nobody else saw. It's the fact that such a well-executed stroke passed through so many people without being noticed. Paramedic, nurse, attending physician, removal team. I myself almost didn't see it. I only saw it because of the light, because of the fan rotating slowly, casting shadows across the eyelid at just the right angle. How many others have passed through? How many more will pass through unnoticed, carrying their secrets into unmarked graves? The other day I casually mentioned it to a colleague, an older guy who has worked here for more than 30 years, has seen things that do unfit on paper, things that don't have proper words. I asked, as if it didn't matter much, "Have you ever found a body with some kind of drawing on the face?" He took a while to respond, then said with a weight in his voice I'd never heard before, "Not a drawing, no, but marks that nobody should have made. I've seen a few." We stayed in silence after that. A silence thick with understanding. He knew what I was talking about. He just didn't want to name it. And maybe that's exactly it. Maybe these things don't have names, no explanation, no proper registry in our systems and reports. Just one phrase that hasn't left my head since that suffocating night. She had her eyes closed, but she wasn't sleeping. She was watching, ebonying death, refusing to surrender her gaze completely. Have you ever wondered how many truths pass right in front of us? Invisible not because they're hidden, but because we've trained ourselves not to see them. If you're listening to this alone, if this story made you look around the room, it's because something in you recognizes the truth in these words. Subscribe to the channel, because what we share here could happen to anyone, including you. These aren't distant horrors. They're the shadows that live in the margins of ordinary life. Some people faint because of the smell in this place. Others tremble when they look at the face of someone who has died, seeing in those features a mirror of their own mortality. But what makes most people request transfers from working here is when the body appears to have been manipulated by someone after death. When you can see the fingerprints of intention on lifeless flesh. And I'm not talking about crime scenes. I'm talking about when the dead arrive marked in ways that make no medical sense, in ways that suggest purpose beyond violence. This case had no wounds, no blood, no trauma whatsoever. But when I opened the sheet, what it had was the big toe of the left foot painted with red paint. not nail polish, fresh poster paint. I've been working at the morgue for more than 20 years. I've received everything imaginable. Children, elderly, accident victims, people who didn't survive by their own choice, bodies that arrived missing pieces, people who died with smiles frozen on their faces. But this case had no injury, no sign of struggle, nothing violent. He was just a man with a painted toe. Just this small detail that unraveled everything I thought I understood about my work. He arrived cataloged as a foal in domestic environment. Apparently slipped, hit his head on the corner of a low table. He lived alone in a back apartment on the 3rd floor. A solitary existence that nobody noticed until it ended. The person who called emergency services was a neighbor who heard the noise and saw through the window that he collapsed. They called rescue. He was already showing no vital signs. A common case, unremarkable. And it really was ordinary until I opened the sheet and saw what waited beneath. The body had already been cleaned by the removal team, as protocol demands. Dry, without visible blood. Everything seemed in order until I noticed the left foot, more precisely the big toe. It was painted red, and it definitely wasn't nail polish. I know how to differentiate between the two. This was paint. Children's paint. Poster paint type. The texture was thick, with that characteristic wet shine that only fresh paint has. It was still fresh, still dry. You touched it, and it still stained your finger. And that's exactly what I did. I grabbed some gauze, touched it gently. It came off on the gauze, leaving a crimson smear. At first I thought, well, maybe he painted it as some kind of game or fixation. Some people paint their bodies, develop manias, strange rituals that make sense only to them. But then I remembered the report. The man lived alone, was 61 years old. No psychiatric history. Nothing in the apartment indicating painting, art, hobbies. Nothing creative at all. The place was sterile beyond normal. A microwave, a worn sofa, a bookshelf with 2 books, no children, no paint cans, no toy boxers, no evidence of anyone else ever being there. The file stated the body was collected at 6:40 in the morning. Simple fall, no violence involved. But if it was just a fall, how was children's paint? The kind that dries within minutes, still fresh hours later. I went straight to the collection team, demanded answers. I spoke with the ambulance driver, with the technician who handled the body. None of them noticed anything unusual. If there had been paint, we would have seen it. We clean, sanitize the body, seal it in the bag. Nothing passed by us. Tay insisted, almost offended by my questions. I persisted, pushed harder. One of them even joked, trying to lighten the tension. Maybe the man died painting his feet. Who knows? But there was no humor in it, because the paint was only on the big toe. No other part marked, no splatter marks, no brush, no container, no logical explanation whatsoever. I carried that question in my head all day long, a weight that grew heavier with each passing hour. I went through other routine tasks, but it hammered away at my thoughts relentlessly. And then, at the end of the shift, when I went to store materials in the supply closet, the second part happened. The part that stole my sleep for weeks afterward. In the supply cabinet at the end of the corridor, where we store gloves, cotton, blades, syringes, tape, ... There it was, a small jar of red paint sitting open, and beside it a cotton swab stained with paint still wet, still glistening under the fluorescent light. Except this jar wasn't ours, didn't belong to any procedure we perform. The brand wasn't one we use in any process here, and the paint was Schooler poster paint, the children's kind. A popular brand you'd find in any discount store. I recognized it immediately, felt my stomach drop. I stood there for several minutes with the jar in my hand, trying to make sense of what I was holding. This shouldn't be here. There's no reason for it to be here. Nobody uses this here. This doesn't enter the morgue through any official channel. It's impossible. But it was there, and it had been used recently, deliberately. I looked up at the corridor camera, checked the footage later. Nothing registered. No one captured on film. Either it happened before the shift began, or it was someone who knew exactly how to avoid being seen. Or maybe nobody else saw it, because nobody else wanted to see it, wanted to acknowledge what it meant. Leave in the comments your reflection beginning with, I commit myself to, about paying attention to the details others ignore. Sometimes the smallest anomalies reveal the largest truths, and your willingness to notice what others overlook might save someone, might solve a mystery that desperately needs solving. That night I couldn't sleep, couldn't silence the questions spiraling through my mind. I kept seeing the image of that red toe, vivid and impossible. I kept thinking, what if they painted it after the body arrived here? Inside these walls meant to protect the dead, who would paint it? Why would anyone do such a thing? What message were they trying to send, and to whom? I could report it formally, could open an internal investigation. But who would take it seriously? Who would acknowledge that inside the morgue there's someone painting the bodies of others, leaving marks that serve no medical purpose? I only did what I always do, what the system allows. I registered it in the report. Observation. Uncommon red pigmentation on the hallux. Origin, undetermined. Clinical words for an uncanny truth. Official language that strips away the horror and leaves only sterile documentation. But the jar remained in my locker for 3 days. Before I finally threw it away, unable to look at it anymore, unable to stop wondering whose hands had opened it, whose intention had guided that brush across cold flesh in the darkness of this place, where the dead wait silently for us to tell their stories. Kept the gauze, kept the photograph, kept track of the time, kept the silence locked inside me like evidence I wasn't ready to present. 2 days later, that same body was forwarded for burial without family clearance, because no relative appeared. Nothing, just an ID number and an address, leading nowhere, leading to emptiness. We followed protocol, as we always do, our movements automatic and efficient, but I couldn't move forward, couldn't let it go. The paint jar disappeared, not the next day, but the following week, vanishing as quietly as it had appeared. I remembered exactly where I'd left it, could see its placement in my mind with perfect clarity, inside the cabinet, on the middle shelf, beside the boxers of gloves. I didn't want to leave it in plain sight, but I also didn't want to store it in my backpack, because that would seem wrong, would make me complicit in something I didn't understand. I just wanted to observe, to wait and see if someone would touch it, would reveal themselves. And someone did touch it. Someone moved it, took it, erased the evidence. What disturbs me is that nobody should have known it was there. I never mentioned it, never wrote about it, didn't take a photo, didn't alert my supervisor, and yet someone took it anyway. And they didn't take just anything random. They took an object that doesn't belong to the morgue, that isn't part of any procedure, that nobody else knew existed there in that forgotten corner. In other words, whoever took it knew exactly what they were doing, moved with purpose and premeditation. We grow accustomed to working with the idea that inside these walls, everything is controlled, measured, secured. Everything has protocol, keys, receipts, documentation for every needle and swab. But there aren't cameras in every corner. There isn't an eye watching every gesture, every movement in the shadows between shifts. And that's when the terror stopped being about the painted toe and became about who painted it, about the invisible hands that move through this place with such confidence. I started observing more carefully, watching the space between actions. I began paying attention to small things that had always been there, but never registered as significant. A box of cotton that disappears before it should. A discarded glove in a corner where nobody performs procedures. A lab coat hanging even after the shift change when everyone should be gone. At first, I thought it was exhaustion. Paranoia born from too many night shifts and too little sleep. But the discomfort repeated itself, grew stronger, more insistent. And then, a new detail emerged. 4 days later, I receive another body. A woman, young, victim of a domestic accident involving gas. She arrived early in the morning, and I went to perform the routine initial examination. There, on her right arm, very close to the crook of the elbow, was a red mark. Thin, curved, like a brushstroke painted with deliberate care. It wasn't a cut, wasn't a wound. It was paint, unmistakably paint. This time dried, but paint of the same tone and the same texture as before. And only there, just one stroke. Almost decorative, like a symbol left by someone who wanted to claim her, to mark her as their own. Poster paint again. That cheap children's paint that shouldn't exist anywhere near this place. I didn't comment, didn't speak to anyone about what I'd found. I merely registered it as localized dirt on the right forearm, compatible with watercolor paint residue. Once again, nothing beyond that sterile description. more clinical language to hide uncanny truth. I was trying to understand if this was some kind of code, if it was a message meant for someone a morbid came, or a signature left by someone who needed to be seen, to be acknowledged. How many times have you ignored the small wrongness in your daily routine? The detail that didn't quite fit, only to realize later it was trying to warn you of something much larger. The truth is, I began to suspect everything and everyone, seeing intention in every shadow. There were days when I'd arrive and notice that the drawer cabinet where I store labels was locked, but with the key turned to the opposite side, as if someone had opened it and closed it from the outside, leaving this small breadcrumb of their presence. There was one night during a particularly empty shift when I heard the sound of stretcher wheels passing slowly through the corridor. Rubber on linoleum, deliberate and unhurried, but there was nobody else on duty with me. Nobody scheduled, nobody authorized. I went to check. Heart pounding. Nothing out of place. No stretcher moved from its position. No new body delivered. No extra technician clocked in. Just the echo of wheels that shouldn't have been rolling. That's when I realized something foolish, but that turned my stomach inside out. Made me question my own sanity. You know, those printed reports we place in envelopes and leave in the coordination tray? Always with the final stamp of approval? One of them came back marked, scratched through with a single word written in red pen. Block letters like a child would use in school. Wrong. And the report was precisely the one for the man with the painted toe. The case that started all of this unraveling. But I had typed it, printed it, stamped it, sealed it in the envelope, verified every detail. Nobody should touch it after that. Nobody had authorization. I kept that envelope. Still have it with me today, folding and refolding at the creases as if it were aging prematurely from being turned over so many times in my hands, searching for meaning in that single word. Write in the comments a declaration beginning with, I discover that ... double quotes about a pattern you finally recognized in your own life. Sometimes we need permission to name what we've been sensing all along, and your acknowledgement might illuminate the path for someone else still walking in darkness, still pretending not to see. I thought about requesting a transfer, thought about talking to someone outside, maybe the press, someone who could investigate without personal stakes. But what if all of this is only happening to me? What if this is just the way this thing manifests itself to me specifically, choosing me for reasons I can't comprehend? What terrifies me most isn't the paint, isn't even the marks themselves, ... It's the calm. It's how everything happens in silence, as if it's being done slowly by someone who lives inside the morgue, who knows every camera blind spot, every unmonitored moment, or by something that only acts when nobody's watching, when the living have gone home and only the dead remain as witnesses. Some people say the dead don't come back, that they can no longer leave traces in our world. But maybe we're always looking in the wrong place. Maybe it's not the body that matters, but rather who marks it, and where this pattern begins, how far back it extends. And maybe it had already started long before I noticed, long before I understood what I was seeing. I usually say that a strange body isn't one that's missing pieces. It's one that doesn't align with the cause of death, that tells a story contradicting the official narrative. We learn to read signs with precision. Active bleeding, bruising, edema, rigor mortis, appearing out of sequence. The body speaks its truth. Only sometimes it speaks wrong or says one thing while the paperwork says another. And that's what started bothering me that Friday evening, creating a dissonance I couldn't ignore. The death arrived around 7 at night, already the end of my shift. But since there was no other doctor available, I assumed responsibility for the intake. It was a 62-year-old man, no serious comorbidities in his medical record, found on the street after cardiorespiratory arrest. Nobody had handled him much. They attempted to revive him, and he came to us with the form already signed. Death on public road. No signs of external violence. Case closed before it even began. Clean, though clean is too strong a word. Too simple for what I found.
The first thing that caught my attention wasn't even visual. It was the smell, a scent that lodged in my nostrils and wouldn't leave. And look, I'm already accustomed to every variety of death's perfume. But this was different, a smell as if something had been stored away, sealed shut, a dry ancient odor that didn't match the few hours since death. It was like opening an old drawer, but from a place that never had ventilation, never had fresh air circulating. And that smell stayed there in the room with me, becoming almost visible in its intensity. I laid him on the examination table. The nurses had already removed the ambulance sheets, and the body was wearing a dark blue hospital gown, open in the back, standard procedure. Nothing visible initially, no stains, no rigidity outside normal patterns. Natural death, apparently straightforward, but when I pulled the gown from the left side, I saw an unusual elevation near the abdomen, a bulge that didn't belong. I thought maybe a hernia, but when I touched it, I felt the texture of cloth beneath skin. I thought they'd left some gauze inside somehow. So I pulled gently, and the edge of a bandage strip came loose from the side of the thorax, revealing itself inch by inch. Except it wasn't wrapped the way we do here, wasn't applied with medical precision. It was sewn with thick thread, a medium beige darkness, like old sewing thread, thick cotton, almost waxed in texture. I continued the examination with growing dread, my hands moving automatically while my mind struggled to process. I removed the gown completely. There was another identical strip attached with stitches near the right shoulder, and one more on the left leg, just above the knee. No visible wounds, no hospital sutures, just these strips sewn directly into the skin with rustic thread, as if someone had fastened them after death, as if they were preparing him for something, adorning him with purpose. But there was no sign of recent needle entry, no fresh punctures. The skin was closed, intact. The stitches seemed old, absurdly old, impossibly aged. There was no infection, no discharge, no inflammation. Just presence, just intention made manifest in thread and fabric. That froze me completely. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at him as if looking at a model someone had assembled incorrectly, had built according to instructions only they could read. The stitches were clean, symmetrical, so perfectly symmetrical that I began thinking I was losing my grip on reality, that I was seeing patterns where none existed. But it wasn't me losing perspective. It was him. It was the body refusing to make sense. I opened the protocol, marked presence of foreign material, and decided to remove one of the strips for closer examination. I cut with a scalpel at the back of the leg, where the skin seemed firmest, most likely to yield answers. The strip was adhered to the skin as if it had dried there over years, become part of him, and underneath it there was nothing at all. Nothing. I mean, there was skin, normal skin, but with a stitch. An old stitch, as if they'd sewn shut a cut that never existed. Had created the appearance of healing where there'd been no wound. I wanted to laugh from the absurdity of it, from how impossible this all was. My brain tried desperately to rationalize it away. Poorly documented surgery, dressing from another hospitalization, long forgotten. But then it hit me with full force. This man had never been through a hospital, had never been operated on, didn't even have an old medical file. Nothing beyond a recently issued ID. No history, no past that made sense of this present. I looked again with fresh eyes, and the stitching seemed almost decorative, arranged with artistic intention. One on the shoulder, another on the leg, another on the abdomen. 3 points, 3 strips, 3 strategic locations forming a pattern I couldn't yet decode, but knew had meaning, had purpose beyond anything I'd been trained to understand. I stopped there that night, closed the protocol, and noted that the external examination was ongoing but incomplete, suspended for reasons I couldn't yet articulate. And as a precaution, I requested they leave the body in the last drawer of the cold chamber, the one nobody likes to use, because it makes a strange noise on the track, a grinding sound that sets your teeth on edge. When it came time to slide the body in, it glided with ease. Light, frozen, too quiet, unnaturally still. But before closing the drawer, I was pulled back again by that smell, that ancient wrongness. Now it was stronger, more defined, like the scent of cloth stored away for decades. Fabric from an old house mixed with dust and time itself. And there was a moment when it gave me the impression that the cloth was warmer than the body it covered, but that observation I kept to myself, filed away with all the other impossible details accumulating in my mind. I returned Saturday morning, driven by something I couldn't name. The idea was to finish the report quickly, but I confess, I hadn't slept properly, and it wasn't from fear. It was from lack of answers, from the way unanswered questions circle endlessly in the dark hours. We learn to deal with the grotesque in this work. Lacerated bodies, opened skulls, overwhelming smells that cling to your clothes for days. All of that becomes numbers, becomes data points in a system. But what doesn't make sense adheres differently, burrows deeper. I went straight to the cold chamber. The corridor lights were off, and the first lamp ignited with that irritating snap of an old reactor struggling to life. The metal key to the largest drawer was in my pocket, the only copy, my responsibility alone. Nobody else had touched it, nobody else had access. I opened it slowly. The smell came immediately, but this time it wasn't just old things decaying. There was something humid about it, as if the cloth had fermented and even frozen. It seemed like the fabric was breathing, expanding and contracting with purposeful rhythm. I examined the body again with mounting unease. There was no excessive rigidity. Everything appeared the same as before, but the strip from the leg, the one I had cut the previous evening, it was folded carefully and positioned over the thorax, arranged with precision and intention. Someone did this, moved it deliberately. Except I checked all the cameras afterward, reviewed every frame. No external access, no strange movement, nobody entered there during the night hours. The footage showed nothing but empty corridors and sealed doors. I stood there staring at the folded strip for several long seconds, trying to make my rational mind accept what my instincts were screaming. Then I collected it with forceps, placed it in a stainless steel tray, and began the internal examination with hands that wanted to tremble. The moment I made the thoracic incision, I noticed there was tissue denser than normal, covering the chest musculature like a second skin. It wasn't fat or fibrosis, nothing I'd encountered in 20 years of practice. It was a smooth membrane, almost transparent, covering the organs with precision, as if someone had wrapped the body from the inside in exact regions, the same locations as the external strips, creating a perfect symmetry between inside and outside.
This wasn't of hospital origin, wasn't from any procedure documented in medical literature. I removed part of the membrane and performed the cardiac analysis. The heart was whole, healthy, functioning perfectly until it suddenly wasn't. No sign of infarction, no lesions in the coronary arteries, no obvious arrhythmia that would explain sudden cessation. What killed this man, according to protocol, was sudden cardiac arrest. But there was no visible reason, no medical explanation. Only the covering and the stitches, only these marks left by invisible hands. I moved to the abdominal region, and there, upon opening the peritoneum, I saw another sequence of internal stitches sewn with the same thick thread in an X pattern, protecting the kidneys, both of them carefully guarded. The stitches appeared ancient, impossibly old. The thread was dried out, faded from time, but completely intact, unbroken. There was no fibrosis or immune reaction, no sign the body had fought this foreign presence. It was as if the body had accepted it, as if this had been part of him from the beginning, woven into his very being. But it wasn't natural, couldn't be. There was no natural scarring. This was something implanted, something done to him by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I closed the examination without writing everything down, without documenting the full extent of what I'd found. I noted only what was necessary, what could be justified. Cause undetermined, awaiting laboratory tests. Standard language for extraordinary circumstances. But what bothered me wasn't what was missing from the body. It was what there was too much of, what had been added without permission or explanation. What if the bodies we examine aren't just evidence of how people died, but testimonies of how they were prepared for death, marked and claimed long before their final breath? On my way out of the examination room, I went to the sink to wash my hands, but I stood there staring at the stainless steel basin, listening to the sound of water hitting metal, lost in thought. And it was in that moment I noticed something else that made my blood run cold. My arms had marks on them, fine marks, scratched into the skin like dried abrasions, 3 on each side, in the same exact regions where the strips had been on the body I'd just examined. It could be coincidence, or it could be contagion of thought, the way obsession manifests physically, or it could be something else entirely, something I wasn't ready to name. I left earlier than usual that day, and for the first time in 22 years of service before leaving. I locked each drawer of the cold chamber one by one, even the ones that were empty, even the ones that shouldn't need securing. In the following days, I couldn't stop thinking about the hands that stitched that man. Hands that didn't appear in any report, that aren't recorded in any medical file. Hands that knew where to sew, where to protect, where to close without leaving obvious traces. Hands guided by knowledge that predated medical training. And since then, I've developed a foolish habit, a ritual of my own. Every time a new body arrives, I lean my face slightly close to the skin, not to smell death itself, but to perceive if there's another scent underneath, a scent that comes before death, as if someone had passed through before me and left their mark, their signature in invisible ink. Express in the comments a personal truth, beginning with I sense that ... double. Quotes about the hidden patterns you've started recognizing in your own world. Sometimes naming what we sense but cannot prove is the first step toward understanding, and your courage to speak might validate someone else's seemingly impossible observations. Some people think working in autopsy is about getting accustomed to death, becoming numb to mortality. But it isn't that at all. What we learn is to grow accustomed to what makes sense, to find comfort in the explainable, because when something doesn't make sense, there's no lab coat, no mask, no protocol that protects you from the sensation, from the way it crawls under your skin and makes a home there. And I'm talking about things you can't unsee. Can't unknow once you've witnessed them? It was a night shift, medley of Yuli winter cold seeping through the walls. And I remembered to this day that it was raining when this body arrived. heavy drops drumming against the windows. A man, around 50-something years old, apparently struck by a vehicle. The documents came with him. The release forms, already signed. It was simply a matter of preparing him for visual identification. Routine procedure. There wasn't blood flowing, no visible open wounds, except for some abrasions on his face. Superficial damage that told only the surface story. But his face, he had a type of serenity about him, you know. It wasn't an expression of pain or terror. It was as if he'd been interrupted mid-thought, caught between one moment and the next. We work on top of freezing steel tables in this place. The light is far too white, too revealing. Time is always somewhat disrespectful here. Moving too fast or too slow, never quite right. And I remember I began the process the same as any other, my hands moving through practiced motions, my mind already categorizing, trying to fit this body into the framework of everything I'd learned, everything I thought I understood about death and what comes after. I checked the data, opened the bag, removed the sheet, attached the identification tags. That familiar sequence we perform without thinking, muscle memory guiding our hands. But it was when I went to clean the face, more specifically the mouth, that something stopped me cold, made my practiced movements falter. There was a strange mark on the upper lip, as if the skin had been sewn shut and reopened by millimeters. A line so precise it seemed intentional, except there were no stitches visible. No scar tissue, just a crease that shouldn't exist. A fold in flesh that told a story I couldn't yet read, that already put me on alert. Set my nerves humming, but I continued forward. I pulled back the cheek to access the teeth, because part of protocol is ensuring there are no visible residues there. Nothing that might contaminate or mislead. Sometimes there's a loose prosthetic or broken tooth that needs removing before final preparation, but it wasn't that at all. Wasn't anything I'd been trained to expect. The dentition appeared normal until I looked again, until I truly saw what I was seeing. On the right side, in the upper part, there were 4 identical teeth, for central upper incisors, one beside the other, all perfectly aligned within human precision. Same shape, same enamel, same luminous quality, and none of them were prosthetics, all rooted in living bone. At first I thought, okay, this could be a rare formation. Supernumerary teeth, those anomalies that occasionally appear. I've seen teeth growing from the roof of the mouth, teeth emerging above the gum line in wrong places, but they're always misaligned, crooked, without defined roots, obvious in their wrongness. Here it was different, impossibly organized. Those 4 teeth sat perfectly fitted, like piano keys side by side, symmetrical and functional. And the detail that made my skin crawl, all of them had roots, deep roots embedded in jawbone that had somehow made space for them. I took 2 steps backward, my body reacting before my mind could process. It wasn't fright exactly. It was that sensation of standing before something that shouldn't exist, something that violated fundamental laws I'd always believed were absolute. I called a colleague from the room next door, needed another set of eyes to confirm I wasn't imagining this impossibility. He came, looked closely, fell silent in a way that confirmed everything. He asked me if this was an exhumation case, if someone had manipulated the dental arch before arrival. I answered firmly that no, this came direct from emergency care. No previous manipulation recorded. We decided to take an X-ray right there, common procedure when we need to verify fractures or internal structures, seeking rational explanation. And when the image developed, I swear it looked like a fabrication, like someone had doctored the film. But it wasn't altered. The roots were there, separate and distinct. 3 of them duplicated in regions that anatomically shouldn't exist, where nature never places dental structures, and the maxillary bone showed no indication of grafting, trauma, surgical scarring. Nothing that would explain this multiplication of impossible teeth. I stared at that image for long minutes, time stretching and contracting, not sure if I was even breathing properly. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted to escape. That's when I had the idea to pull his medical history, to search for some documentation of this anomaly. Since the name and ID number were correct, I managed to find a record of a dental consultation performed 7 years earlier. A routine examination preserved in digital archives. And guess what I discovered? The digital X-ray marque from 2017 showed a normal dental arch, perfectly ordinary. 2 central incisors, 2 lateral incisors, Everything aligned as human anatomy dictates. In other words, this wasn't congenital, wasn't something he was born with. His dental arch changed, transformed between that appointment and his death. His body had been rewritten by hands I couldn't see, by intention I couldn't fathom. Nobody at the morgue wanted to dig deeper, wanted to ask the questions this discovery demanded. We prepared the body according to standard procedure, covered the face with the sheet, and delivered him to family members who suspected nothing. They didn't request additional examination, didn't question anything, but I could never look at a smile the same way again. Could never see exposed teeth without wondering what multiplication might be hiding there. That same night, after closing the file and clocking out, I printed the x-ray and left it in my personal locker. Breaking protocol. It wasn't right to do this. I know. Violating procedure for personal obsession. But I couldn't throw it away. Couldn't let it disappear into archived obscurity. It bothered me in a way that even the heaviest autopsies never have, because it wasn't about blood or death or violence. It was about the error. The cold, precise error that shouldn't exist in biology, in nature, in reality, as I understood it. The following day, I waited for the odontological examiner's shift. Dr. Castagno, an old-timer who'd seen faces turned inside out, dental arches shattered by car accidents, teeth embedded inside skulls from impact trauma. I thought if anyone could give me a technical answer that made sense, it would be him with his decades of experience. I showed him the x-ray and said carefully, "Doctor, this is from a body that arrived yesterday. Look at the upper right incisors. Tell me what you see." He looked in silence for several long seconds, his professional mask slipping slightly. Then he said what I'd been dreading. "You duplicated the file by mistake. Overlapped the images somehow." I shook my head firmly. "No, this is real. I saw 4 identical teeth in his actual mouth with my own eyes. Touched them with my instruments. I watched something shift in his face, saw him recognize this wasn't a joke or error. He leaned back in his chair, adjusted his glasses with trembling fingers. "This isn't a common anomaly. This is impossible. This violates everything we understand about dental development." I asked him to explain better, to give me framework for understanding, and then he said something that froze me completely. Words that echoed in the sterile silence. "Do you remember the last time something in your ordinary world was so wrong it made you question whether you'd ever truly seen anything clearly before? The number and symmetry of permanent teeth are determined in childhood, encoded in genetic instructions. Long before baby teeth even fall out, the blueprint is set. The body doesn't create new functional teeth like this, much less identical ones perfectly aligned after age 40. It's developmental impossibility." I told him the man's dental history was completely normal until just a few years ago. Showed him the digital record from the 2017 consultation, the before image that made the after incomprehensible. He took the paper, compared the images side by side, and said something very slowly, choosing each word with care. "Someone or something interfered with this, changed his fundamental structure, and it wasn't surgery. No surgical technique could accomplish this without leaving massive scarring, without trauma markers." I asked if he'd ever seen anything similar in his long career. He hesitated, and it was the only time I'd ever seen Dr. Castagno hesitate, ever seen his professional certainty crack. He said quietly, "In 2006, there was a similar case in Pelotas, but it wasn't teeth. It was nasal structure, as if the septum had divided itself into 2 mirrored halves, perfectly symmetrical. They never publicized it, never investigated officially. Some things were encouraged to forget." The conversation ended there, door closing on questions neither of us wanted to pursue. He returned the x-ray and said it would be better to forget what I'd seen, better for my career and my sanity. But how do you forget that? How do you forget a face that smiles with too much symmetry, with teeth multiplied beyond biological possibility? 2 weeks later, I needed to organize a drawer of old records from the period when our system was still physical. Before digitization erased certain irregularities, I found a file from 2004 marked as inconclusive accident, case closed without resolution. And when I saw the archived image, my stomach clenched with recognition and dread. The man's face was remarkably similar, not identical, but absurdly resemblant to the one I'd just examined. Only in this record, the name was different, another identity entirely documented, and the dental arch was incomplete. Missing teeth where extras would later appear. I compared the photos with obsessive care, studying the ears, the skull shape, the jowls, every identifying marker. Either this current man was a direct relative of that other one, sharing impossible genetic similarities, or it was the same man with a face that had been adjusted over 20 years, rebuilt piece by piece into something that only resembled human. Share in the comments something beginning with, "I have learned that ... double quotes about the moment you realize the world operates by rules more complex than you were taught. Your acknowledgement of this hidden complexity might give someone else permission to trust their own impossible observations, to stop dismissing what they know they've seen." I went home early that day and never wanted to work in visual identification again. Couldn't trust my eyes anymore. Today I only do the cold part of technical autopsy now. Measurement, temperature, estimated time of death, clinical distance that keeps me safe from seeing too much. I don't work with teeth anymore. Refuse assignments involving dental examination. And whenever someone smiles too widely, shows too many teeth, I look away instinctively, not from fear of the smile itself, but from what might be wrong behind it. What multiplication might be happening beneath the surface of their seemingly human face. What they might be becoming while pretending to remain unchanged.